Okay, good morning class. My name is Dr. John Musau, taking you through Bot 120, course it will be General Botany. And now we shall be looking at plant structures. And now the first topic we are going to talk about vascular plants. Now we will start by defining what's a vascular plant. A vascular plant is a plant with specialized vascular tissues. And the only specialized vascular tissues include the xylem and the phloem. Now vascular plants include the club mosses, hostels, ferns, gymnosperms. We'll come to know what are gymnosperms. Angiosperms, we also know what are angiosperms. And this is now an example of pteridophyta. These are fern, as you can see. It says under division pteridophyta, which is also an example of vascular plants. Now, this fern, you can see it has leaves, it has also stems, meaning that it has true leaves and it has true stems. But I can see there are no flowers, so meaning they are non-flowering plants. Now, let's start by the division pteridophyta. Division pteridophyta are non-green plants such as ferns, hostels, quarrelworts, and fernales. Therefore, they are vascular plants because they possess the vascular bundles such as the phloem and the xylem. Now, these pteridophytes, they have leaves, as I have said earlier. You can see this typical plant. It has leaves, but also small in size. It has stems. So that's why I'm saying they have leaves. But now these leaves, we call them the fronds. They also have true roots, true stems. And therefore, these are also examples of vascular plants. You can see the examples of now pteridophytes there, which are the ferns, hostels, club mosses, and quailworts. Now, this is an example of a young frond. These leaves, we say they have leaves known as fronds, these ferns. Now these are frond, you can see on the diagram, something like a seaweed coiling with seeds in between it. These are not seeds, but they are structures we call the sori, plural, sori, and soras in singular. Now these are young rolling frond. Now, we also have the liverwort here. We say that's another example of the pteridophytes. These are young. The first diagram here shows a young unrolling frond, and the other one is a liverwort, which is a fern alive. Now, pteridophytes can be homosporous. Homo meaning one, sporus coming from the one spores. Homosporous means that they produce only one type of spore. They can also be heterosporous, producing two different types of spores. Now, spores differ in size, and now the small spores are called the microspores, while the largest spores, we call them the megaspores. Spores germinate. Now, after they germinate, they produce an haploid gametophyte. And this gametophyte, we call it the prothallus. Prothallus is a structure which has the rhizoids. It is below the sporangia 4. We'll see it later. So that haploid gametophyte is called the prothallus. And now the homosporous, as we have said, homosporous meaning they produce only one type of spore. Now, homosporous pteridophytes produce bisexual gametophytes, meaning two types of sexual gametes, bisexual gametophytes. While now the heterosporous pteridophytes, produce unisexual gametophytes. Are we together? Now, in a gametophyte, we say that reproduction is oogamous in type. What does this mean? This means there are male sex organ and female sex organs. Now, these male sex organs, we call them the antheridia, while the female sex organs, we call them the archegonia. We'll come to see what sexual composition is the antheridia and what sexual composition is the archegonia. But I can introduce it to you that antheridia are the male structures of a gametophyte, while the archegonia are the female structures of a gametophyte. Now, antheridia, we can relate antheridia to testes in men. As testes produce sperms, the antheridia also produce gamete. We call them the antherozoids. Are we together? Yeah, now those antherozoids are the sexual gametes produced by the antheridia. And the antheridia, we said that they are the male sex organs of the gametophyte. Archegonia, now, we say they are the female sex organs of a gametophyte, and therefore they enclose the egg cells. Fertilization in these pteridophytes require water, and that's why most times you'll find these ferns and its allies that they grow near water areas due to their fertilization. Now, as now these male and female organs produce these gametes, that's the antherozoids and the egg cell. The egg cell and the antherozoids, they fuse to form a diploid zygote. What's the meaning of diploid? Diploid means that it produces an zygote with full number of chromosomes, and that is represented by 4n, full number of chromosomes, because the antherozoids contain haploid number of chromosome 2n. The egg cells also contain haploid number of chromosome, that is 2n. So once the 2n is the antherozoids combine with the 2n in egg cell, we form a 4n, which is a diploid zygote. And this diploid zygote is retained in the archegonial venda, meaning that it is the archegonial venda is around the archegonia, the male sex organs. Are we together? Where it develops into an embryo. As we know that zygote, after the fusion of male and female gametes, that's the antherozoids and the egg cells, we form a zygote. This zygote developed to an embryo in the archegonial venda. Now, after the embryo is formed, the embryo grows subsequently to become a young sporophyte. Have you seen something we call alternation of generation from a gametophyte to a sporophyte? So, gametophyte produce gametes. Now these gametes grow into a sporophyte. Gametes grow into a zygote. Zygote grow into an embryo. Now this embryo subsequently grows into a young sporophyte, which finally becomes an independent adult plant. This is all about pteridophytes. And now, this growing from gametophyte, producing gametes, to a sporophyte plant is what we call alternation of generation. Now, the other point is that the life cycle includes an alternation of generation. Now, this alternation generation is where an haploid gametophyte alternates with is followed by a diploid sporophyte. Are we together? An haploid gametophyte generation is followed by a sporophytic generation. But now, which is dominant one? The dominant generation is the sporophytic generation because it contains the full number of chromosomes. That's why the sporophytic generation it produces spores, but the gametophytic generation it produces gametophyte which grows into a sporophyte. You see, sporophyte cannot change into a gametophyte, but gametophyte can change into a sporophyte. And that's why we say that the sporophyte generation is a dominant in the life cycle of a pteridophyte plants like the ferns. Now, let's continue. Now, in the tropical rainforest, we have the ferns growing on top of other trees. Now, these ferns, we call them the epiphytes, which means that they grow up on other plant species. Epiphytes. Don't forget about that. Well, how does these plants obtain water? Now, after the rain rains on the branches of the mother tree, it flows down around the trunk until it reaches the epiphyte where it is. And that's where the epiphyte gains that water for growth. Now this leads to the growth in these pteridophytes which grow above other plant species. There are also other purely aquatic ferns such as water fern or the water velvet. Now these are the ferns which grow around the water areas. Now this is now a typical diagram of an epiphyte. You can see it is growing on top of another plant species. Epi meaning top. Therefore, this epiphyte is another plant species growing on top of another plant, and that's why we say they are known as epiphytes, because they obtain nutrients from on top of other plant species. Okay. Now, pteridophyte, we say that they have leaves, they have true stems, and they have true leaves. But we said one thing: these pteridophytes do not have flowers, therefore meaning they do not bear seeds. Therefore, it means that if they do not bear seeds, they don't reproduce by fertilization. They instead reproduce by means of sporulation, production of spores. That is what we call sporulation. Therefore, these pteridophytes are non-flowering plants. Okay. Now, this now the spore-bearing structures. You can see some structures like seeds. They are the spore-bearing structures in pteridophyte. Example of pteridophyte, we say they are ferns and eat allies. Now these seed-like structures, we call them the soras. Soras in singular. Soras is one, and sori is many of them. Therefore, in plural, we call them sori. In singular, we call them soras. Therefore, the soras are the spore-bearing structures in now these pteridophytes. Sorry for that inconvenience. Now we say that these are the soras, singular, sorry, the plural. In the first diagram here, you can see structures like seeds. They aren't true seeds. They are structures, we call them soras. Soras is one, sorry is in the plural. Soras are present above the leaves of these pteridophytes. There are very many species of pteridophytes. Many of them we have come across them, others we haven't seen them, but we will soon come across them. Now, we have the study of ferns and pteridophytes. We also have the person who studies about ferns and the pteridophytes. And now the study of ferns and the pteridophytes, we call it the pteridology, coming from the one pteridophyte. Pteridology, I say, it comes from the word pteridophyte. Therefore, pteridology is the study of ferns and other pteridophytes, such as the ostales. Now, the person who studies about ferns and other pteridophytes, we call him a pteridologist. Are we together? Pteridologist is a person who studies about ferns and other pteridophytes. That is now the story. You can see it, the sorus in an epiphyte. It is on top of a leaflet, and they said the leaflets in pteridophytes, we call them the pinna. They contain leaves, we call them the fronds. And you can see the spore-bearing structures above the leaf, we call them the sori. The singular one is known as the sorus, plural sori. You can see there are many. This is an epiphyte, as I said earlier. You can see it very well. It is growing on top of another bigger species. It is obtaining nutrients from another species. And that's why we call it an epiphyte. Epi meaning above. It grows above other plant species. Now here is my sorus. You can see it very well. As you can see it, the leaf has some spore-bearing structures. I said the use of these sorus, they release the spores. They store the spores. And when the spores ripen, it bursts open, releasing the spores to produce another plants. Okay. We have the general characteristics of pteridophytes. Number one, some of them we have already discussed. Number one is pteridophytes show alternation of generations. What is the meaning of alternation generation? We have the haploid gametophyte, which has the sexual organs. Now, the haploid gametophyte is followed by diploid sporophyte, which are asexual. This haploid gametophyte produce sexual structures known as the antheridia and archegonia, as we said earlier. The sporophyte gametophyte, the sporophyte generation produce the asexual structures. We call them the spores. Sporophyte produce spores, gametophyte produce gametes. Now, alternation of generation means that gametophyte generation is followed by sporophyte generation, which is the dominant generation. I say the sporophyte is the dominant generation in a pteridophyte plant. Therefore, number one, I said these pteridophytes show alternations of generation, whereby a gametophyte generation is followed by a sporophyte generation. Now, I want to show you what we call archegonia and antheridia. Now, you can see my structure here. You heard about the prothallus. Prothallus is the gametophyte generation in a pteridophyte. Now this is the prothallus. We said it contains the gametes. The gametes are composed of the male and the female gametes. The male gametes, you can see they are near the bottom, are called the antheridia. And the female gametes are near the top. We call them the archegonia. Now after these male gametes, the antheridia and the archegonia combine, is when we form a zygote, which later grows into an embryo. Hope you understand that. Now, this structure is what we call a fund gametophyte, and this name is prothallus. Don't forget that. As we said earlier, the gametophyte is composed of the prothallus. The sporophyte is composed of the spores. Sorry. That's number one, alternation of generation. Number two, the dominant sporophytes are vascular herbs that are terrestrial. Now, what's the meaning of vascular herbs? Those are herbs containing vascular bundles, and that's why we say the dominant sporophytes. Sporophytes, I said, they are the spore-bearing structures. The dominant generation in a pteridophyte. The vascular herbs are terrestrial. Vascular meaning that they contain the vascular bundles. That is the xylem and the phloem. Now, number three is that this pteridophyte can be epiphytic. What is the meaning of epiphytic? They may be growing on top of other plant species or purely water species growing around water areas. That is point number three. Don't forget it. Said most like ferns, they grow around water areas. You have also seen some plants growing on top of another plant species, and that's why we say they are epiphytes. Number three, their stems are often rhizomatous, meaning that the stems, they have structures known as rhizoids. These rhizoids obtain nutrients and water and also mineral salts from the soil or from the culture. If it is a culture meaning any growing place, that's a culture. Stems are often rhizomatous. They contain rhizoids which obtain nutrients. Now, one has to add points which are not also listed here, that these plants, they have true leaves, true stems, and true roots. That's another point, but they lack flowers. Therefore, that's point number four. Add this. The plants have true leaves, true stems, true roots, but no flowers. Therefore, that's point number four. Point number five, we also add another point. They are vascular plants, meaning they have vascular bundles such as the phloem and the xylem, as we said earlier. That's the point number five. They are vascular plants. They contain the xylem and the phloem. We have already said about the alternation of generation. So those are 5 points. You can research for many points. And we have already said they have true roots. And we have already said reproduction is by means of spores. Don't forget that. Now this is now what we call the pinna. You can see the small leaflets along the stalk here. These leaflets, on top of the leaflets, is where we get the sorus. That's now a typical pteridophyte. Now there are very many points to add, but I think you will research for more points. This also, you can also see this diagram. On top of leaflet, we have the sorus here. This diagram here, we have the sorus. Even this diagram, around Around the leaf, you have the sorus, and on top of the sorus, you can see the small structures. The black one are what we call the spore-bearing structures, the sporangia, spore-bearing structures. They release the spores. Sporangia, they are the spore-bearing structures. Same to this one, the other diagram. On top of these sorus, we have, though they are invisible with bare eyes, but they are visible with the aid of a microscope. Therefore, on top of it, we also have the spore-bearing structures, which are the sporangia. They release spores once they ripen, but they are very much visible in this diagram here. Okay, let's continue. Very main diagram showing about pteridophytes. Very many of them. Now about the distribution of pteridophytes. Actually, pteridophytes are like everywhere. Due to the presence of very many species, the pteridophytes are mostly all over the world. We say they are worldwide distribution. They are distributed all over the world due to their presence of many species. They are mostly not affected by temperature. They are able to survive in harsh temperature conditions, but mostly you find these plants growing in moist temperature and tropical regions. It also can be found in all but the most frigid and most arid environment. I said arid meaning most summer and dry. They can survive in harsh temperatures. Okay. Now, as I said earlier, fertilization is also required. Fertilization is whereby now, as we said earlier, the gametophyte generation release the male and female gametes, and therefore, for these gametes to fertilize or to fuse, the fertilization now require water, and therefore, that means for this pteridophyte generation to develop, water is required for fertilization, and therefore that's why most of these plants grow around river areas. Most of them, example are the ferns, you find them growing around areas with plenty water, moist areas with water. Now in terms of the taxonomy, we studied in the high school that taxonomy is the study of classification. And now these pteridophytes are classified into 4 subdivisions. And these subdivisions are composed of true ferns, and the remainder are the allies. One of the division is Coelentophyta. Coelentophyta is also known as the Coelentopsida or the Coelopsida. Coelentopsida or the Coelopsida. And now this Coelentophyta contain organisms of the family we call as the Coelentosai. They are this. I repeat, this Coelentophyta contain organisms belonging in the family the Coelentosae. Okay, the second division we have the Lycopodiophyta or the Lycopodiopsida or the Lycopsida. There are three types of organisms belonging to 3 types of families. As listed, we have the family Lycopodiaceae, the family Selaginellacea, and the family Isotaceae. You will understand later. But those are the three family. What is important is to get to know the four subdivision of the division pteridophyta, and that is the coelentophyta, lycopodiophyta, the equisetophyta, which is also known as the equisetopsida. The family members are known as the family Equisetaceae. That's the third division. The fourth division is known as Polypodiophyta or the Polypodiopsida. The family consists of true ferns. Now, those are the four subdivisions of the pteridophyta: the coelentophyta, lycopodiophyta, equisetophyta, and the polypodiophyta. And now those are the classes are the families are listed. In the case of coelentophyta, we have the family Coelentosea. Lycopodiophyta, we have the three families there. The first one being family Lycopodiaceae. Equisetophyta, we have the family Equisetaceae. And the Polypodiophyta, we have the families of true ferns, family Polypodiaceae. Okay, that's the end of lecture 1. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Let's meet next time for lecture 2. Your lecture, Dr. John Masao. Thank you so much.